Come on up. If you don't mind, you can move up or you can hang out there. It's fine. We'll start in 2 minutes. They're just grabbing their samosas and coffees and whatever else, and then we can have a conversation about this, and we'll be good to go. So while we're waiting for everybody to have a seat or whatever, grab the coffee, that's fine. This is our 21st Gang Prevention Town Hall. We started these in September of 2019. We'd planned these 8 months prior to that. It took a lot of planning efforts. And each and every one of these has been completely different. My name is Ron Chinzer. I'm part of this Gang Prevention Task Force. We have some other officers that are also part of it in the back. We have some people in the community. You guys have been around for quite a bit. Ryan, Liz popped in. You've popped in as well. Everybody's popped in a few times. But the purpose of these and really why we wanted to do these, I'll get into the background to it. But why I actually prefer smaller groups like this, and we've had as many as 70 people show up, is it gives us a chance to have a real conversation. And that real conversation has to do with what's actually happening. All right, and what we mean by what's actually happening is when we talk about gangs and we talk about gang problems, it's very easy just to simplify it, right? You take 4 letters, G-A-N-G, and you attach it to a problem, and it becomes simple mentally and emotionally and strategically to say, okay, we could deal with this, but in reality, it's not that simple. It's actually a very deep issue. So these conversations, what they allow us to do as Toronto Police, allows us to take a different look into things. All right, it's really about perspective management. And the reality is, there is not one single solution to this. There is no solution, but there are many solutions. And we need to identify who the solutions are coming from and where do we need to drop them into play and how do we all support each other, being government organizations, but most importantly, community members. And community members as a government representative or organization, or if you work for an organization, like if you really look at that term itself, community members, it sounds like it's them and us. It's not. We're all part of this. All right, there are realities to it. Myself and Detective Conover, that we talk about this all the time, as well as some of our partners and other officers where, you know, Ken, we were speaking about earlier when you had said, hey man, we spend more time at work than we do sometimes at our family. All right, look, I'll spend 8 to 10 hours at work. By the time I get home, I'm lucky if I get 4 hours of quality time with my wife and my kids. And that's if my wife and I are on the same page, which is about 20% of the time. All right, so we spend quite a bit of time here. And I think for everybody, when you get a job and you get a career and you're working at it, that serves a bigger purpose than what's obvious. All right, so the benefit of having a smaller room like this is we get to have a real conversation about what's happening. I've spoke to all of you, with the exception of yourself, sir. I didn't get a chance to talk to you. And I asked you all, like, you know, what brought you here today? So in a room like this, we can keep an open conversation. I want everybody as best as you can, if you're comfortable, to be honest. It doesn't matter. You're not going to hurt our feelings. It's the point of this is to find solutions, not to say who's right or wrong. The point is this is just to hear stuff out. So in this room, I'll just ask you all individually, if you don't feel comfortable saying your name, it's fine. If you do, by all means, go crazy. And kind of just say what brought you here today. If you're part of an organization, you could say, you know, what organization you're part of. And that way we can get a better understanding for what are the perspectives in the room and how can we guide conversations. Because sometimes you'll hear stuff and we don't understand where it's coming from. So it might sound so different than where you're looking at it, and that's cool. But I'm gonna have a better understanding, a grasp of the content you're saying and the perspective you're coming from and what you're saying and what impact you're gonna have if I know where you're coming from. So, sure, if you don't mind. Thanks, Jay. So the way I'll spend maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we're gonna go over a high-level overview and have a real conversation, and there we can just get to the nitty-gritty. You know, what's stopping this? What's the actual problem here? And for us, when we got tasked with this idea, the initial idea, because it evolved over the last 3 years. Actually, today's the 3-year anniversary. But this has evolved. Initially, the idea was, how do we get a gang member out of a gang? All right, and where that idea stemmed from was our deputy chief went out to British Columbia on this conference. British Columbia has a gang strategy, an anti-gang strategy called End Gang Life. It started in 2013. They're a bit of a different place than we are. Their gangs are very different than our gangs. So we went out there, spoke to them, came back here, and we said, listen, we need to evolve this. What I mean by evolve this is traditionally as police officers, what we end up doing is whenever there's gang violence, we go out there, we run investigations, we arrest people. 100%, you have to do that. The people pulling the triggers on the guns, they need to be held accountable for what they do. But over the last 15 or 16 years from gun and gangs inception in 2005, the numbers really haven't changed. In fact, the numbers have grown. So I'm confident we put a dent into there, but the numbers are growing, so the evolution of gang crime and gang lifestyle is beating the pace that we're adapting and catching up to the actual problems. Because traditionally what happens is all the organizations here, what do we actually deal with? We deal with surface level issues because they pop up and you got to deal with it. You pop up, you got to deal with it. So we end up doing extensive research to really get into the field of, one, finding if any other organization in the entire world has a successful gang exit strategy, and then two, can we mimic it and copy it? Because the idea was, give us a pretty big task. How do you do it? And we didn't know how to do it. And we said, listen, why do we need to spend time creating something when if we can find somebody that has it, we'll just take it, implement it here, change it where it needs to be changed, and we're good to go. We looked around the world, we didn't find anything. We spent 6 months of hard research in the academic field, contacting many different police agencies, police services, saying, what are you guys doing? And we realized is nobody has anything that works. Nothing that works anywhere for a problem is this. The other side to that is when we got into the research, this problem is huge. All right, and I say this all the time because it's the absolute truth. When it comes down to gangs, it's not a problem you need to understand in width, it's about understanding it in depth. All right, and the depth issue comes into what happens for somebody who is born a baby to grow up and at the age of 14 to pull a trigger and kill somebody else. That's not a problem you deal with at 14. Okay, that's a problem that you have to look back at, and we found a bunch of academic research as well as experts in the field that when we collected them in environments like this, we started to build a good picture and understanding of what was happening. And that picture and understanding involved a few things, and the best way I can describe it to people is through a Rubik's Cube. All right, I was at a school doing a presentation on this to get buy-in from kids, and we explored different things. We actually tried to get gang members out of gang. There was about 65 or 70 gang members that we had dealt with through the course of 2 years that we really tried to figure out ways to get them out of a gang, and we never succeeded with any of them. We have kind of one success story, but that's because we got him at a young age. We got him at about 12 or 13, and whatever we did was exactly what he needed. Now, that's a one-off. All right, so I consider that an individual success, but that by no means should be the standard to say we did it, we figured it out. It doesn't work that way. So as time went on, I went to the school, and there was a group of kids, and they must have been 11 or 12, and I had to explain it to them, all right, what exactly the model is and what is the perspective we're looking at. And one of the kids was playing with a Rubik's Cube, and I use that, and it's the best and simplest example. And the way we set that up is this. All right, really, if you want to attack gangs and gang violence, you can't just look at it from one angle being, we got to arrest the bad guys and girls. Yeah, we got to arrest them, for sure. All right, if you do something bad, you're going to be held accountable. There's no negotiation in that respect. We're not here to change any part of that. But what we are here to say is we don't want that to happen in the first place. So for that not to happen, not only do you have to worry about from a law enforcement end of actually enforcing laws and finding the people, but we have to do other things. So we have 4 pillars, and those 4 pillars for us is education. Once we got into the gang space, Jason's been in gun and gangs for 15 plus years. I've been there for 5 years now total, but prior to this, I dealt with gangs quite a bit. I grew up in a gang environment. I have friends in gangs. I got all that stuff. And I thought I had a good understanding of what's actually happening in gangs, but when we got into the research, I realized, oh man, we have no idea what's happening in respect to everything outside of our experiences. So we knew really big that you gotta compile different things. So education for us was really big, always staying up to date in all the new aspects of things that we're learning that are gonna help solve this problem. So education is one of our biggest pillars. The second part of that is prevention, right, which is where our gang prevention task force comes into play. Ultimately, the goal is, how do we stop this from happening? How do we have it so that in 10 years from now, this whole problem is at the most minimal it's going to ever be? And that involves preventing people from joining gangs in the first place. After that goes intervention. And intervention is a very important pocket. And the reason why it's there and the reason why we highlight it is law enforcement, we're the beginning for a lot of youth that get involved in gang crimes from getting into the criminal justice system, going to jail, getting involved in courts, becoming cemented in that gang lifestyle, having the gang label attached to them, building connections, being easily influenced. And right now there's tens of thousands of people that are gang involved or at risk of gang involvement that are sitting in the criminal justice system that are neglected in terms of what happens when they come out of jail. Inside jail, for some of these people, it's the best thing ever because you got schedule, 3 meals and a bed. That's how it's looked at. And in there, for the first time, for many of these people, they're in there, they have structure, they have guidance, they have direction, they have some sense of authority, they have something that helps fill those gaps, but once they go back out, it becomes bad habits all over again. Because it's very hard to change those bad habits. And then the last part is the big problem with gangs and kind of why we're here today and why the Prime Minister in the last election and all the federal leaders are talking about gang crime is the impacts of violence in communities like this. It's massive, and it's a big problem. It's a big problem for many reasons, not just the loss of lives, but the fact that innocent people are being shot and killed at any time of the day in any neighborhood. It's all over the place, so it has to be dealt with big enough that it's a topic of federal discussion. And with us, as law enforcement, as police, our perspective into gangs is the violent side. And all across the world, the number one way to deal with gang violence is arresting the people who commit the gang violence. That has its role. But with us, the global picture, once we understood this, the global picture was that to attack these gangs, you got to look at it like a Rubik's Cube. All right, well, the Rubik's Cube is, for us as law enforcement, there's 6 sides to the cube, there's 9 pieces on each side. We look at the blue side, and we put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and the blue side's blue, and we said, we got it figured out. It's done, right? We got it figured out. But what we don't realize is on the other end, there's many different organizations and groups that are impacted. Gang members live in community housing most of the time, in Toronto, I'll say. They go to schools, they get involved in jails, they get arrested, they get prosecuted, they can't get access to jobs, they have no attachment to an adult mentor or a group, they have mental health issues, they come from a broken home, they might have drug addiction. Those are just some of the minor issues. Now, those areas of impacts need to be brought in together to really have a solution. So on the other side of that Rubik's Cube, ours is blue. The other side might be community housing. And while ours is all blue, community housing is the orange side. It might be all messed up. So what would they do naturally to fix this Rubik's Cube? They just want to make sure their orange side lines up, so they do what they got to do, and in turn, our blue side gets messed up. The bottom side is schools. Schools do the same thing. They want to get green everywhere. It becomes green, but everything else is messed up. And when we started to understand this issue in depth, we started to say, oh, wait a minute. We can't solve this Rubik's Cube unless we're all talking together to understand that we can fix this together, and that sometimes it's going to get uncomfortable. Sometimes some sides might be lopsided, but the end goal and the end result is we need to attack this problem, being gang violence and gang membership, to make sure that we're all on the same side. So it takes a collaborative partnership to understand that we're all on the same vision path. We all see the same thing at the end. We can all acknowledge and respect our individual roles in the process of finding the solution and maximizing the success of the people involved. And we can do it together as long as we're open to communication. Those pillars we began to expand. And initially, as a police organization, when we got tasked with this at the very beginning, we had to ask some questions, and those questions popped up in different ways. Number one is, what is a gang? So we have to be very clear of, this is the problem, so what is a gang? Number 2 is, where do we go? And number 3 is, well, what is a gang member? What is a gang member? So in the purpose of getting to the conversation point of this, I'll tell you flat out what the purpose of a gang is, all right? And it's outside of reason. Some people have said gangs are for sense of belonging, gangs are for finding friends, and gangs are a safe space potentially for people. Those are reasons, but they're not the purpose. The purpose of the gang is this. It's to deal drugs, control the territory, and collect debt. All right, so all aspects of gang involvement all over the world include some of these 3, all right, if not all of them. Now this bleeds over into many things. Liz, you talked about it. You guys are part of the human trafficking movement, gang related, heavily gang driven for human trafficking, where you have underage girls that are manipulated, drugged, bribed, extorted, and forced into the the prostitution trade for the purpose of collecting money. They travel, they take them from place A to B. And those girls that are trafficked, they're not one fit. All right, they're not just people from small communities in Northern Ontario that get manipulated and they come from here from broken homes and then get brought. That's not it. It's everybody and anybody. And if you look at that perspective, every interaction that they have at a young age is a victimized interaction. Gangs do that. What else do gangs do? I'll ask you here, what else do they do? What are the other crimes that they do? Shootings? What happens when you shoot somebody? What could happen? Death. Murder? Right, here's something interesting. December. So we've had this conversation. I think, Ryan, we spoke about it earlier, where you had said January started as a slow month. December, there was 21 murders in the city of Toronto. 21 homicides in the city of Toronto in December alone. So we look at dates as reset buttons, right? And we say, okay, well, 2020 has been a good year. Gangs don't abide by days of the year. They don't say it's Monday, it's a new fresh start. All right, criminals, people who pull triggers, and that's not to say all of those murders were gang related. A good portion of those were, but it's to outline a bigger and a deeper issue that we put things by calendar dates, we put things by biannual reports and weekly reports, But the real world out there, outside of our influence, doesn't operate on that. All right, each day is an individual day. So they wake up today, happy I woke up. Today's gonna be the same as yesterday, but guess what? Today is today, because tomorrow might not be here. For most of the people that we're dealing with on the very, very tail end of it. So once we realize, all right, kind of what are gangs doing, and they do a host of things: robbery, break and enters, they do extortions, witness intimidation, auto theft, shootings, drug trafficking, drug dealing. We talked about pimping and prostitution. Any crime you could think of is attached to a gang. So that's why at the beginning when I said we oversimplify the word gang to 4 things and we expect a single solution, it doesn't work that way. All right, we got a host of issues of things that they do. Second on that became kind of, where do we go, right? So we had figured out a few things, and we had gone out and spoke to a bunch of police officers and said, all right, we have to attack this gang problem 3 years ago. Where do we got to go? And everybody gave us neighborhoods. Jay and I had maybe 10 or 15 conversations with people as knowledgeable as Ken in gangs and areas. And we're like, man, all right, we kind of know the areas, but at the same time, us being really involved in the communities and our own individual portions of our career, we're like, man, wait a minute, you can't blanket one whole area and say, okay, this whole area is a gang area. All right, they're victimized as much as they're victimized more by gangs than most people are, because they're terrorized by it, they're all hostage by it. So we want to have an objective lens of how are we finding where to go, right? So we know empirically what is a gang, what kind of activity are we looking for? And the second part is, where do we go? And Ken had mentioned all these areas. Right now, here's the thing: if you're not from Toronto, or you're not from the neighborhood, and let's just use which is a perfect example, and you see 10 colored guys playing basketball, what's the automatic assumption? Just tell the truth. Automatic assumption: these guys are gang members, right? Are they gang members? Probably not. Like, probably not. I'm 99% sure that the majority of those kids playing basketball in that neighborhood are not gang members. And the problem is, when we paint an area as a gang impacted area, those kids are being swept up into that. And we might be creating a bigger problem than the solution in the attempts to solve the problem. Right? And historically that happens. And that's not the fault of anybody. It's not the fault of any organization. It's just a surface level, subjective look into how do I deal with what's in front of me. All right, and we do this all the time as law enforcement. We have an area that gets 3 or 4 shootings, we have to put an end to it. You know what the number one way is of deterring crime? It's the fear of getting caught in everything you do. So for those of you here and who've been in a relationship and have thought to themselves, I'm gonna explore opportunities outside of this relationship. I'm not judging anybody, Greg, but just don't mean it. But I want you to think about this. For those of you who've had that thought of, I'm gonna explore opportunities outside of this relationship, where did your hesitation come from? Was it the fear of getting caught by your spouse and what the impacts of that would have been? Was that your primary reason you didn't do it? So while this applies to crime, it applies to human beings. And this whole aspect, as we got into it, it just started becoming a very human issue for us. Right? And that's where we started to look at it in depth, is this is not about crime as much as it is here. It's about broken people that become even more broken and create more broken people, and that cycle continuing to grow in areas being blanketed with a reputation or an idea and zero investment back into there because it's a gang impacted neighborhood. All right, so this in front of you, you have a map, and this is from the city of Toronto. This is from 2014, 15. They did an equity score in the entire city of Toronto. They broke it down into 140 neighborhoods. And in those 140 neighborhoods, they have these equity scores. And these equity scores are based off of a few things. They're based off of the average median income in the household, not necessarily the education levels, but what jobs were being had. What did the household look like in terms of single parent homes or dual parent homes, number of kids? What was the access to economic opportunity in terms of what were the actual access points to jobs in the area, as well as access to transit lines? What the community felt like their voice was in change in their community. And they found a whole bunch of other things, but what they had realized was, or they'd broken it down and they said, hey, listen, out of the 140 neighborhoods in the city of Toronto, there's 31 of them that are low equity neighborhoods, which means that they're under an acceptable threshold. What that threshold is, I don't know. But they said, hey, there's 31 of them. When we came across this and we looked at the reasons behind it, we found a whole bunch of other stuff. But we looked at this and we said, hey, all right, we got problems, and this neighborhood is one of those areas. Right, this is one of those areas that is really on the lower end of the equity within the area. Now the good news is, starting this month in 2020, and I've already received a whole bunch of emails about it, the City of Toronto is pumping in millions of dollars worth of resources into these communities to foster some change. All right, just this morning I got a $300,000 grant sent to me for community members to pursue arts. There was another $75,000 seed grant brought up a couple of days ago that had to do with exploring spaces for a year. So for those of you community members and community agencies, please send me an email and I will send those to you directly. If not, they're going to put them out on my Twitter and my Instagram for anybody to access to. That's not for us. The point of these is to find people like yourself that are dedicated and committed and might lack the resources and need to get it. Go nuts. The point of that is to invest into these communities with the right people doing the right things. So now it's nice to see I've got a whole bunch of emails from a City of Toronto employee says, hey, here they are, they're coming down the pipe. So hopefully every week I get them, I'll dump them out, go nuts, do what you can. If you need some connections outside of these town halls, let us know, send me an email. I'm about 9 months behind in my emails, but I will get back to you in 2022 with the best contact I can give you. But the point of that is we looked at this, we said, okay, there's a low equity score neighborhoods, and then we did on our own, we looked at crime maps, and we wanted to know through police intelligence and police records, where are the gangs living, where are the gangs committing their crime, and where are gang crimes happening? It just so happens the low equity neighborhoods and the gang crimes are almost the exact same. That's why we came in here. This is number 21 out of 31 town halls. 31 town halls being the 31 neighborhood improvement areas. The other areas, it's not to say they're perfect, it's to say right now the impacts are happening right here and they're living in here. So one, we know what gangs do, deal drugs, collect debt, control the territory. Two, we now know where to go because we have objective data being low equity scores as well as crime maps. And the last one became, well, who joins a gang? We're like, how do we find a gang member? We'd already spoke about those 10 kids playing basketball. You can't just go in there and say they're all gang members. It's not fair to them. If you call somebody a gang member for a long time and they have limited opportunity, what do you think they become? They become a gang member. Right? If you have a spouse and you call them a cheater for a long time, what do they become? A cheater. As humans, it's a human thing. Right? Who wants those labels? Labels are a real thing. Nobody wants it. Nobody ever wants it. I mean, for those of you who have family or friends, unfortunately, who get deemed with a terminal illness, right? There's many different reactions to it, but I know of two types of people. One type of people hear the actual term, they get the label, right? You have a cancer, for example. And I know a police officer, actually, he just retired. He was diagnosed with cancer when I first started policing 14 years ago, and they had said you got 6 months to live. And his mindset was, no, not me, I'm okay. And 14 years later, he just retired. He had leukemia. He had like one of the worst types of cancer you can get. And it was his third time getting it. That's a different mindset. That's an overachiever. That's somebody who gets a label and says, okay, now I know what the problem is, I'm gonna find the solution. But he's a rarity. And I know some people who they get diagnosed with a fever and they die 3 days later because they accept defeat. Well, the reality is overachievers are special because there's not a lot of them. Right? Underachievers tend to stand out because people sympathize, they see them, they feel sorry for them, and they show it themselves. Right? So when it comes down to who joins gangs, it's not about underachievers or overachievers, but it's the impact of labels. It's the impact of, well, how does somebody become a gang member? And you were given these laminated cards that say gang risk factors on them. And those risk factors, those are from a 2007 publication to Public Safety Canada. Again, an academic source from professionals in the field, PhDs and people with a whole bunch of letters behind their name. And they said, we're going to invest in doing some heavy research and we're going to produce a government publication to say, what are the commonalities between gang members all over the world? And what they found was there are 36 risk factors broken up into 5 categories. And if you look at that card there, none of it has to do with race, sex, ancestry, origin, religion, belief system, birth, where you grew up. None of that has to do with any of it. So the actual issues that humans face that take them into this life of crime and to life of gang are deep-rooted social, psychological, and influential reasons that start from a very, very young age, as young as 0 to 1. And it has a lot to do with the home environment. So once we got through there, we said, okay, we have an objective lens. So we had done all these different things, Jason and myself, to say, okay, we have an idea, we have a good framework, and the framework we took is from the United States called the Comprehensive Gang Model. It's on our website if anybody wants to see it. The publications we all source are on our website. You can take a look at it. It's open, it's available for the public to see. And that model says, listen, you got to incorporate a whole bunch of different things. You have to have a good method to implement programs. And you have to identify the communities as well as the right people, which is us doing this right now. And then now we go from this to finding the kids that are most likely to get into that pathway. And we use our 4 things, our education, prevention, intervention, and suppression, all at the same time. Not one, all at the same time, all the time. Right? So we've had competing groups sometimes. We'll have one group that speaks of the mindfulness practice, and one group that speaks of job employment opportunities, and one group that speaks of investing into the communities. And all of them are extremely die-hard in what they have to offer. So die-hard that they're not even willing to listen to another side of things. Right? They're like, no, mine is the answer right now. Like, this is what we need to do. I love the passion, but I need them to be open-minded. Right? Yeah, you do that, and you do this, because people are different. Those risk factors, there's 36 of them broken into 5 different categories. Now, exponentially, those numbers are unbelievable to work with. Our deputy chief would call our office and say, guys, what does the program look like? Initially, they wanted a program. And every month, we'd say, I don't know, we're still figuring it out. And then eventually, we picked up the phone, we said, there is no program, there will never be a single program. There needs to be programs. There needs to be solutions implemented at the right time by the right people for the right reasons all the time, and we all need to be working in alignment to fix that Rubik's Cube. And with us, we'd gone through, we'd worked with a whole bunch of people over the course of 6 months. Jason and myself went to every police station in the city. There were 17 at the time, they're down to 15 now because they merged a couple together. And we'd gone out, we spent 15 minutes doing a powwow to 2,000 frontline police officers, and we said, hey, these risk factors, if you come across them, you can recognize them in people you're dealing with, people you have a relationship with, and you think they're on the path to gang involvement, or you can talk to them and say, hey, do you want to get out? We can help you out. Let us know. So we did that over the course of 6 months, and that's where we started to get the influx from frontline police officers to say, I got somebody for you. And they'd send us out this form, and it's all anonymous. Sometimes we knew the people we're dealing with, sometimes we didn't, because we didn't necessarily need to know their name. Like for us and for our purpose, I don't need to know who I'm dealing with, for the most part. There's a certain threshold I gotta know, but for the most part I don't. I can tell you through social media, through my Instagram and my Twitter, after I do high school presentations, I always get 3 or 4 kids that are heavily gang involved that end up reaching out and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? And you'd expect initially when we started doing this canvas in the first 2 years, we thought the kids that were going to be most interested in this were going to be that riffraff gang member, right? The one who's kind of in, kind of out. It was the opposite. We had the top 10% of the most violent that were in that were really motivated by wanting to wake up tomorrow because they'd already been shot at, kidnapped, abducted. They'd been involved in so many things that their level of anxieties were so high, they looked at this as a last chance to get out. Unfortunately, we lost the motivation in all of them. They just disappear. I don't know what happens with them. I don't even know their names. I have a screen name, and in most cases, it's a fake name, which I'm okay with. I tell all the high schools when I go out and I talk to them, I said, hey, here's my Instagram and social media. You could send me a message, but don't follow me. All right, and there's reasons why I say don't follow me, the high school kids that are really gang involved, and it has to do with their own protection. What would happen potentially if you had a gang member participating in a police gang exit program? Look at the optics of that. And what's the reality to it? If you have a gang member who's in that part of that 10%, the most violent of the violent, and he's following, Toronto Cop on Twitter, and he's really involved or she's really involved, and his friends see that, that's going to be a problem for him. That's not part of the solution for us. So we had to be really cognizant of what we did. And over the course, we described many things, and I'll skip through that, but we'll get to, we now have a couple stories that were unsuccessful that are important to talk about because they're not one-offs. Right? There's thousands of them here in the city, and I'll tell you one of them, which was our last one that I'm very disappointed in because it did not pan out the way I expected it to pan out. But we're gonna go through those risk factors with this guy's story. All right, so this kid here, these are your risk factors that we went over, right? Family, school, peer group, individual, and community. And we'll go through what that life cycle is. So all those are big, but they don't all happen at the same time. All right, family risk factors generally show themselves at the age of 3. School risk factors show themselves at the age of 6. Peer group shows itself at the age of 9. Individual really develop at the age of 15. And 18 is the community risk factors. But as you go on, those numbers tend to grow. All right, those 5 categories, if I were to give you here now, 5 different colors, black, blue, orange, white, yellow. And I said to you, how many different combinations of this can you make? What do you think the number would be? A lot, right? It's 3,125. So if just looking at 5 risk factor categories and there's that many potential combinations of issues that result in this problem, it's impossible to say you can have one solution. If I did, I wouldn't be here. I'd be consulting for Ryan in the back and making $1 million a year. I don't have the answer to this, right? I have answers, but not the answer. But then we looked at further, and there's 36 risk factors in there, and as you go on, those become an unbelievably big number that is unreal to even look at. So we realize, okay, listen, the way to attack this problem is we gotta get in as soon as we can on the prevention end. And we found a few things. So the prevention end, empirically based, being what actually works. And what actually works and how we find this is all these programs that are in existence, like for you in the social space, you're not-for-profit, are you funded by a grant at all or no? Anybody in the social space, are you grant funding? Some grants for exploratory options, right? Or no? Summer job grants. And then yourself, yeah? Are they summer job grants or different grants? And you have to supply evaluations on them?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Some are joint with the school.
Who does the evaluations for you?
Who does the
Yeah.
evaluation?
Is it driven from you?
Yeah, it
Yeah. So so this is the way it works for those of us in that space and for community members to know, right? So these grants that the City of Toronto is offering right now, anybody can apply to them if you're a resident and you meet the requirements. And there's certain requirements because they're not just giving money away anymore. It doesn't work that way. You have to meet a certain threshold, a certain requirement, show you have the competence and capability. I couldn't apply for a grant to say I'm going to be a meteorologist and I want to talk about it. I don't have the history, but you would. You got the credentials to do it, right? So you can partner with somebody. Well, the way these grants work is the money comes in and you have to report back on how successful you were. So you have to kind of set these numbers to say, okay, we want this money for this purpose, and this is how we know what we did worked. And what we had found was there were some big problems, right? And it's not to say that the problems lied with the organization itself. It had to be with that there was no third party doing the evaluation. So if I said to you, I'm going to change the world, and you said, how are you going to do it? And I said, everybody I speak to is going to be happy. And the government gave me $1 million, and they said, well, how do we know it worked? And I filled out the form that said, hey, everybody I spoke to said they were happy. They're going to say it's a success. We couldn't look at that. We said, wait a minute. Once we identified this, we're like, these are not reliable things to look at. So we had to find programs that were independently evaluated from an academic body. So it's finding like a college or university that would be involved in the program, but only in the respect of we're going to look to see what actually works through surveys, interviews, ongoing phone conversations. And what we found was in the prevention space for gangs, in terms of dealing with the root cause issues from family, school, and peer group being broken family environments, low attachment to school, really social disorganization and low equity in neighborhoods, we found that between the ages of 0 to 9, that's when prevention strategies have been shown to be the best to implement, 0 to 9. Prevention works amazing. I'll tell you why, for a few reasons, but a different way in the mindful respect is between the ages of 0 to 7, and think for yourself now, all right? Because it's true. Think for yourself now, 0 to 7. Look back to your childhood. Some of us had great childhood, some of us not so great. Some of us have traits right now in ourself that we don't even like. But I want you to look back to 0 to 7. What happens in our brain is we operate on what's called a theta wave. It's a state of hypnosis, and you're collecting data, and the data is, what do I need to become to survive, not to succeed? So for yourself now, all the parts about you that you don't like about yourself, think back to 0 to 7. Just think back. What was the programming that you were planting in your brain without even knowing it that made you who you are? And really, 0 to 7 is a big influential period. And it's massive. So the prevention works there because they're still easy to influence. It works. If you get a 15-year-old kid, for anybody here who's had a 15-year-old or deals with teenagers, how difficult are they to deal with sometimes to change their mind? Sometimes. They're extremely difficult because they're set in their ways. If you were to talk to me when I was 15, I had it figured out. You couldn't tell me anything, but I got it figured out, unless I had an attachment to you or you were a bit of a mentor or somebody I looked up to. But for gang kids, who's that person? It's another gang member, right? It's somebody who sees the victimization between 0 to 7, sees a kid who comes from a real broken home and says, oh, I know what to do here. You know why they know what to do there? Because that was them. There's a learned behavior. So 0 to 7 prevention works. Intervention, 12 to 18, right? Because we get them in a real weird space. And intervention programs are this. We'd done a gap analysis in 2018, August 2018, we had a publication produced. It's pumped out to Public Safety Canada. They're gonna pump it out now. And we done a gap analysis, and what that was is, once we realized, hey man, we can't solve this problem, the police, we need psychological and social services to fill in where they gotta fill in. We said, well, what's the problem between these gang impacted neighborhoods and social services? Perfect example is, has more social services in that intersection than any other place in Canada. Yet it's one of the most violent impacted places. What's the problem there? There's a few problems after we conducted this gap analysis, and this analysis was done by Humber College for us. That third party coming in to give an objective lens. And what Humber College learned after hosting 3 sessions in the west end of the city and 1 in the east end of the city is they found about 15 different recommendations for what's happening with services. And I'll give you some of the outlines and some of the examples on a different strategy. So one of them is, if you're over the age of 18 and you're a male and you're coming out of jail, there's nothing for you. Good luck. Right? So think about it. You're a 16-year-old kid. You get arrested for a violent offense. You go to jail for 2 years, potentially, if it's a real violent offense. And you get brought back out. And that's probably not your first offense. And now you're 18. You're on your own. Not only that, the hours of operation aren't conducive to what's needed. Some of them are supposed to be focused on kids, but they operate Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And where are kids for the most part? Where are parents for the most part? Some of them offer services, but they've never consulted the neighborhood that they were in to determine what was actually needed. In one of our town halls, we had a great quote. I love it. It's a really well-respected community member. It said, "We are not underserviced, we're poorly serviced." And that comes down to, was the neighborhood consulted as to what's actually needed here? In that town hall that I got brought up in, one of the neighborhoods had said, you know what we really need is we really need some after-school transportation care. So, you know, some parents got to leave work early to come back to pick up their kids, shuttle them over to another spot. We have all these services, but none of them address anything we actually need, and that was a common theme. And that was because generally what happens is we use conventional wisdom. We're all guilty of it as organizations coming in to fix problems. What we do is we look at an area, sometimes not coming from the area, sometimes not talking to people. We'll take an idea, a conventional wisdom idea, and say, you know what the problem is here? The problem is they don't have jobs. And then what do? We write a grant, or we invest, and we say, we're gonna bring jobs to this community. Without ever asking the community, what is the problem here? And that was part of our town hall rationale, was to say, before we can come in and provide services or framework this into the city of Toronto, we have to touch base with the 31 most impacted neighborhoods and say, what's happening here? Like what is happening here? Where are the breakdowns? How is each neighborhood? And I'll tell you this, in the 21 neighborhoods we've been in, no 2 neighborhoods have been the same. But here it's the purpose of how we're framing things and how we're phrasing things. And I'll tell you this, a lot of the questions come back down to funding, right? Resources. And here's the vision for this, all right? And I wholeheartedly believe this. The vision for this is this has to be a zero cost strategy. You cannot associate cost or funding to what we're doing. Initially, there's got to be the growth to get it established, but it has to be driven from the inside out. And the reason being is, if you want to talk about long-term sustainability for human issues being deep psychosocial issues, what happens when money's not there? We just let it fall apart? Government's going to change. People are going to change. Positions on things are going to change. Things should evolve. But the real solution to gang violence, to add in the word gang, which I'm starting to become really detached from that because it's such a deep issue, is strengthening families. That is the solution. If you said, Ron, there's one thing you got to focus on, if there's a genie here and I get to rub it, and you said, okay, this genie's going to solve this problem and you can only put it in one place, it's got to come from strengthening families. And strengthening families does not mean you over-service them. It does not mean you provide them solutions to every problem they have. In my opinion, after speaking in depth to hundreds, if not thousands of community members over the last 3 years, what's becoming very apparent is that over-servicing people for problems that they shouldn't be over-serviced for reduces the resiliency of families. All right, there's no ability to come back from anything. There's always a solution. There's always somebody, and those problems lie deeper than anything else, right? If you look at political platforms, all right, some of the political platforms, sometimes I look at them and I look at the educational aspect of things, the empirical, what works. They have nothing to do with anything. This is what normal people should be doing. Right? You can't force some of the services into places that should be about resiliency, but I can tell you, to answer your question, the people we've dealt with in the federal and provincial government have been 100% on side. Now I can tell you that the subjectivity to that is we are exclusively inclusive. And what I mean by that is, at the beginning we were very inclusive. We said the more the merrier, come on in. And what we found is organizations, and this is where it goes into organizations and people, and this is the big thing is, we think organizations make decisions. They don't. People make decisions. And people change. So we had organizations that looked really good on paper. They gave us a good pitch and they'd show up and we found out very quickly through asking the right questions and listening, oh, you're in it for yourself. You know, we're not into the idea of bashing another organization or not sticking to the vision. And the benefit to that is we took that stance 2 years ago. We have no riffraff that we partner with. We don't. And because we cut the fat and the excess garbage, everybody we deal with is great for us. And if we get to know you're garbage, you're out of here. Take a hike. We have no time for that. So for us, the subjectivity to my answer to you is, yeah, everybody you deal with is great. But it's because when we deal with the riffraff like you dealt with, hey, if you're not with us to go forward, you can have fun on your own, man. I hate to tell you that. It's not about making everybody feel good. If we're in the purpose of making people feel good, we would never get to where we want to get to. In some of these town halls, we get a little deeper in terms of bringing out people's own perspectives and their own stereotypes, their own nonsense, and it comes out well. And the point of that is to get out in the open. Some people refuse to participate, which, Liz, I know you've been at a few where you can see, Ryan, you've been at a few where some people will be like, well, that's not the case. All right, I'll tell you the example and really what we talk about. So generally we didn't expand on it today because this is a bit of a more mature room. But what we expand on is when we have the audience of 50, 60, or 70 people here, and we talk to them, I say to them, describe a gang member to me. And I give them a scenario where I got a magic pill, and if I give them this kid a pill, this gang member a pill, we're gonna change their life. And in, this is 21, I think I've done it in 17 or 18 of the organization town halls. And out of the 17 that I did, and 15 of them, and this was driven by the community who was in participation all over the city, the description was a black male, 15 to 18. Not my description. I didn't say that. They said it to me. And when I said it back to them, you know what they called me? Racist. I never said it. They said it. Right? And the point of that is it's the worst thing you could do. So we bring it out, but then there's people who refuse to participate. They say, well, it could be anybody. And then they give you the complete opposite. Well, we're gonna go with, one person had said in the very beginning, they'd said, we wanna go with a 50-year-old male at Church and Jarvis as the gang member. And the point, I know why he did that, and I know why the other person did too, is they are more worried and more focused on them feeling good about them being like, oh, I'm not that guy, than getting to the real problem here, right? And the real problem is that's a commonality. And the problem is it's not fair to everybody else that comes from there. And we got to brawl that in the open. So, you know, with us and all these people that are individual, that are very self-focused and interested in making themselves feel good, we're not focused on feelings too much here, man. You got to detract from that. You use feelings and emotions as motivation to drive forward, but my mission at the end of this, and Jay's mission, is not to feel good that we did it, it's to get the job done. Right? Right now, if you look at it on the streets, it's a war zone for a lot of people. I don't care to feel good when I leave here, right? My job is to say, how do we solve this? And we got to stay focused there. So the emotional side of things, it's good to use as motivation to go forward, but it's not the be all end all. I don't sit there, that's not for me, that's not for Jay. So we cut that garbage off very quick. We're very straight up about it, very straight up. So I hate to go off on a tangent, but that's a point of like interest for me. I make it well known that we don't have time for that garbage. And trust me, Jay and I have come across a lot of garbage people that say they're doing amazing things, but they're absolute trash. Like human trash. They make the problem 10 times worse. It's true. That there is my social media. If you're on Instagram or Twitter, by all means handle it. I do put stuff up on there. The reason I put this stuff on there is it happened by accident. We kind of had to do it for a bigger purpose. But we realized we're getting traction in different places by doing this stuff on social media. Or we're getting different levels of government to see what's happening, to start inquiring, to start asking questions. And what that does for us, it gives us a platform to drive investing into the right people. And the right people, when I get down to one of the town halls that we did, there was an elderly gentleman, and he was in a really heavily gang impacted community. And he had a question, and his question was, how do we reduce the cost of renting school space? And so I said, okay, well, what do you need the school space reduced for? And he says, well, he's like, listen, for the last 5 years, he said, I rent some school space and I tutor kids, 150 kids he's tutored over the last 5 years. And he said 7 of them have graduated university. He did it by himself, no money. He does it by himself. That's a guy where, imagine him with a grant like that, what he could do. It's not on purpose of exploratory. He's already done it. He knows how to do it. You got to build those people up, not other pop-ups that come in because they see money and it's a good chance to get their name out there, feel good, get some recognition, potentially go and get a PhD out of it. which has happened. Right? It's absolutely disgusting. So that being said, the purpose of this was to find community leaders, community champions, to say, okay, where do we invest in? I hope everybody signed in on the email list, so that way we're going to reach back out to you. We do have a strategy from these town halls that we're going to take going forward, that hopefully we get some authorization in April and kick it off in September. And we're going to be focusing on a specific area, this being one of the areas, to really drive initiatives from the inside out. What I'll ask you now is here, based off of our framework, and the idea was this, to find people, say this is the framework, this is what we're looking at, this is our standard, and we have standards for this. Again, exclusively inclusive, it's to say, well, for you here in the community, or wherever you're from, what are the issues that you're seeing? Where are the gaps that you're seeing? And not just your services and how you deliver it. It could also be against the police, by all means tell us. The insights we've gained from some of these conversations is tremendous for us organizationally. We're learning different things. I'll give you an example of some of the most impactful things that Jay and I take back to the Toronto Police Service to change things. One of the number one problems we're having right now in the city is obviously murders, right? Homicides. Like I said, 21 homicides in December. It's a big problem. We're just in January 9th today. And January, yeah, it hasn't been as rough as December, that's for sure. But one of the issues we had, or one of the problems we had with homicides was, and we brought it up in an area that had received quite a few homicides, we said, well, hey man, what's happening? Because for us as police, whenever there's a murder, we go and we knock on doors right away. And we say, hey man, has anybody seen anything? And nobody says anything to us. So that came up, and one of the community members had said, hey, listen, like you gotta understand, man, there's a murder, there's a crime scene, there's police cars, there's police officers wearing hats and uniforms. Our walls are paper thin, and you're asking me if I saw a murder? Like, I'm not telling you anything. But they said if you came back 2 or 3 days later and you weren't in a uniform, and you came back kind of during the daytime hours, like late afternoon, mid-afternoon, we'll tell you everything, but confidentially. That's great for us to know, right? It's not that we weren't doing that, but we don't do that all the time, but that'll help push policy change. Say, hey, now going forward, all these murders, if they're related that way, hey, we have to follow up 2 or 3 years later. The other thing we realized too is not a lot of people know about Crime Stoppers. Like they know, but they don't know. Not everybody has access to the internet. Not everybody has social media. Not everybody sees things. We're developing different ways to connect with people. So I'll leave it here open. We have about 20 minutes, 15 minutes before we got to get kicked out of here. To say if you have any insights, any areas, by all means let us know. If not, I highly encourage organizations to connect with each other. Liz is the connection for everything, so she'll be able to tell us. But you know, we're evolving, we're changing, we're figuring things out. We got I think, a good direction to go going forward come September, but April will be the planning process, and that is taking everything we've learned over the last 31 town halls and putting it into action. But the question is always what happens after this? All the information we've collected, all the networks we've had, is we're going to do something with it. We just need to have the buy-in and the support from the community. Right, so I'll leave it up to you guys if you have any questions, by all means, any answers, we'll go Liz and then Ryan.